It's always frustrating to see a team stick with a player for just a little too long. Like, did you know that there's a team out there that's stuck with their mediocre quarterback for over 2 decades? Yeah, no joke. So today, we're talking about the game's most important position and why it's important to replace them before it's too late. Most Super Bowl championship teams these days have one thing in common: a bona fide superstar quarterback. Oftentimes, though, teams will only think that they have themselves one of those guys, and so they hold on to that QB year after year, thinking he'll finally break out and take their team to the promised land. But it just never happens. And before you know it, you wasted a decade backing the wrong signal caller. So, here are 10 instances where an NFL team kept a quarterback around for way too long. Dallas Cowboys, Tony Romo. A healthy in his prime Romo often played like a top 5 QB, but it was those darn crazy turnovers and big game blunders that didn't help matters. Just look at that fumbled snap in the 2006 NFC wildcard game. Yes, Romo led Dallas to the postseason in 2006, 2007, and 2009. He would have done so as well in 2008 if he didn't miss 3 games. But after a while, it should have been evident to Jerry Jones that Romo wasn't that guy. In both 2011 and 2012, the Cowboys had the NFC East in their grasp, but they collapsed down the stretch and finished 8-8. That right there should have been enough for Jerry Jones to move on from Romo. But no. He kept Romo on for another season in 2013, and Dallas once again finished 8-8 and missed the playoffs. And we should also note that Romo missed the team's Week 17 winner-go-home game, which resulted in a loss to the Philadelphia Eagles. Yes, he stayed healthy in 2014 and helped Dallas to 12 wins and an NFC East Division title. But rushing champion DeMarco Murray and that Dallas star-studded O-line had a lot to do with it. A fractured clavicle forced Romo to miss all but 4 games in 2015, though he did win 3 of his 4 starts. Then, during a 2016 preseason game against the Seattle Seahawks, he suffered a compression fracture in the L1 vertebrae. Dak Prescott took over as the starting QB, and the rest is history. Romo would retire after the season. Jerry oversaw 3 Super Bowl winning teams in the 90s. Why was he alright with mediocrity in the Romo-Jason Garrett era for so long? Baltimore Colts, Johnny Unitas. Unitas was the best QB the NFL had ever seen by the time he retired. He put the Colts on the map by helping them to 3 NFL championships and a Super Bowl V victory. But the Colts were a little too loyal to Johnny U, which didn't make a lot of sense considering they had a great potential succession plan in Earl Morrall. The latter left for the Miami Dolphins in 1972 and finished his career there, winning 2 more rings. Unitas' numbers dropped big time over his final 4 seasons in Baltimore. He made just 10 total starts over the 71 and 72 seasons, winning only 4 of them. And in each of his final 5 seasons as a Colt, Unitas threw more picks than touchdowns. Finally, Baltimore traded him to the San Diego Chargers ahead of the 1973 season. Unitas started just 4 games and struggled in what would be his final NFL season. Unitas was a star in Baltimore throughout the late 50s and 60s, but his past dominance didn't mean the Colts should have held on to him for all those extra years. At least ownership and management could brag about being a loyal franchise after that. New York Jets, Joe Namath. Broadway Joe forever cemented his legacy in New York sports lore by leading the Jets to a stunning Super Bowl III upset over the Colts, which still stands as the franchise's only championship to date. Namath remained one of the NFL's elite quarterbacks for a few more years after the Super Bowl winning season, but injuries and inconsistent production began to catch up to the Hall of Famer. Namath played just 5 games in 1970, 4 in 1971, 13 in 1972, and 6 in 1973. He tossed a whopping 66 interceptions over his final seasons with gangrene, and his completion percentage dipped below 50% in 1975 and 76. Namath tried giving it one more go with the Los Angeles Rams in 1977, but a string of injuries and bad play led to a disappointing final season in the NFL. The Jets should have noticed Namath's decline by the time the 70s rolled around, but they kept on hoping he'd stay healthy and return to form. The loyalty to Namath prevented the Jets from finding a better, younger quarterback option to carry them over the next decade plus. Seattle Seahawks, Dave Krieg. The undrafted product out of Milton carved out a very solid career at the Seattle Seahawks. Craig was a 3-time Pro Bowler and helped Seattle to 4 playoff appearances, going as far as the 1983 AFC title game. Craig played with Seattle from 1980 to 91, and he became the full-time starter in 83. Though he helped bring relevance to the franchise, Craig's production quickly hit a wall and began to fade after the 88 campaign, which was also the last time he made the Pro Bowl or the playoffs in Emerald City. Seattle brought him back for the 1990 campaign, even though Craig threw a whopping 20 picks in 89. He threw 15 touchdowns against 20 picks, but not even that could deter Seattle, who brought him back once again in 91. And rather predictably, Craig continued to struggle, throwing for 11 touchdown passes against 12 picks. So, technically better? And to think they could have drafted future Hall of Famer Brett Favre in 1991, if only they had the guts to move on from Craig. The Seahawks recycled through quarterbacks throughout the rest of the 90s decade and fell into long-term mediocrity, all because they stayed loyal to a very mediocre QB for so long. Tampa Bay Buccaneers, Vinny Testaverde. The Buccaneers had given up on a man named Steve Young as their QB. They traded him to the San Francisco 49ers in 1987 and used the first overall pick on Heisman Trophy winner Vinny Testaverde. It's hard to blame the Bucs for botching this. Young certainly didn't look like a future MVP, Super Bowl champion, or Hall of Famer until after he landed with the star-studded 49ers. And Testaverde was a can't-miss prospect at the time. But perhaps similar to what they did with Jameis Winston, another former first overall pick, Tampa Bay was a little too patient with Testaverde, believing he was close to stardom. They waited and waited and waited for the breakout, but it never came along. The Bucs didn't have a single winning season in Testaverde's 6 years there. In his 5 seasons as the main starter, he tossed more interceptions than touchdowns, including a whopping 35 picks in 1988. Oof. Testaverde would later find success with the Cleveland Browns and New York Jets, becoming a very solid journeyman QB throughout his career. All he had to do was leave Tampa Bay, which he did in 1993. Clearly, the Bucs were the problem. St. Louis Cardinals, Jim Hart. Hart played 18 seasons for the Cardinals, spanning from 1966 to 1983. You would think he'd be a multi-time champion after spending that much time with one franchise. But nope. The 4-time Pro Bowler helped the Cardinals to 3 playoff appearances in that span, which was good for a franchise with such a long losing history, but Hart was never really an elite QB, even though the Cardinals treated him like one. Hart only completed more than 55% of his pass attempts in 4 of his 18 seasons with the Cardinals. He only hit the 20 touchdown mark once and threw 18+ interceptions 8 times. Being content with such subpar quarterback play for almost 2 decades didn't really get the Cardinals anywhere. Who'd have thought? Chicago Bears, Jay Cutler. After the 2008 season, the Bears acquired Cutler from the Denver Broncos in a blockbuster trade that saw them move out another promising but inconsistent QB in Kyle Orton. Cutler threw a ridiculous 26 interceptions in his first season with the Bears. But he excelled as a game manager in 2010 and helped Chicago win the NFC North and reach the conference championship game, where they ultimately fell to the rival Green Bay Packers. Cutler won 7 of 10 starts in 2011, but a broken thumb sidelined him for the remainder of the year, and the Bears unraveled without him. He had an inconsistent 19 touchdown, 14 interception season in 2012, but the Bears won 10 games, so it was enough to keep him aboard for another year. Cutler was hot and cold under new head coach Mark Trestman in 2013, but backup Josh McCown looked just as good, if not better, in the 5 games he started in place of Cutler. Yet, nonetheless, the Bears handed Cutler a giant 7-year extension worth $126 million. What followed was 3 straight losing seasons for the Bears and a lot of turnovers from Cutler. Chicago kept holding on to a turnover-prone QB with a questionable attitude all that time, when they could have looked for an upgrade to help them get over the hump with Matt Forte and that stingy defense. But keeping Cutler all that time just set the Bears back year after year after year. And to think, they could have drafted, say, Andy Dalton in 2011, Russell Wilson, or Kirk Cousins in 2012, or even Derek Carr in 2014. Atlanta Falcons, Matt Ryan. Unlike most other quarterbacks on this list, Ryan's production didn't really decline to mediocrity or awfulness. It's just the Falcons refused to rebuild time and time again during his final years with the franchise. Atlanta missed the playoffs every single year from 2018 to 2021, which were Ryan's final 4 seasons with the franchise. They could have traded him for a plethora of draft picks, like what the Lions did with Matthew Stafford or what the Seahawks did with Russell Wilson. But ownership and management remained convinced that an an aging and expensive roster could recapture what they had in 2016, when they made it all the way to the Super Bowl. But there was a bigger problem here. Ryan alone was still playing well enough to prevent Atlanta from landing any high enough draft picks so that they could take his successor. So yeah, keeping Ryan just delayed the rebuild. Imagine if Atlanta had traded him earlier, like say in 2019. Who knows, maybe that move sets them up to draft someone like Justin Herbert or Tua Tagovailoa in 2020. But anyway, the Falcons finally traded Ryan to the Colts in the 2022 offseason for the low price of a third-round pick. That's right, a measly third-round pick. Can you imagine what they could have gotten if they made that move just a few years earlier? Baltimore Ravens, Joe Flacco. It's an unofficial rule in the NFL. Win a Super Bowl if you're a non-elite QB, and you basically buy yourself at least 5 more years with the franchise. Joe Flacco was not the first example, and he most certainly won't be the last. So Flacco was never a Pro Bowler, but he had a knack for coming up big in the postseason. As a rookie, he helped lead the Ravens to the 2008 AFC Championship game, where they narrowly fell to the Pittsburgh Steelers. He outplayed Tom Brady in the 2011 AFC Championship game, but, you know, the whole Billy Cundiff thing. After all that playoff heartbreak, the Ravens finally broke through with a Super Bowl 47 championship. And it was largely thanks to the clutch play of Flacco. He tossed 11 touchdowns and 0 picks in 4 playoff games that year, including the mile-high miracle to Jacoby Jones. The Ravens rewarded the Super Bowl 47 MVP with a 6-year, $120 million extension just weeks after winning the Lombardi Trophy. The contract gutted the Ravens' long-term cap situation, and Flacco's play started to regress almost immediately. Baltimore would make the postseason just one more time over the next 5 years with Flacco. He threw double-digit picks in each of those seasons and only hit 20 touchdown passes twice, and 4,000 passing yards once. The Ravens drafted Lamar Jackson 32nd overall in 2018, and he took over as the starter for Flacco midway through the season, after the latter suffered a knee injury. Jackson won 6 of 7 starts and led Baltimore to the AFC North Division crown. Finally, at long last, the Ravens moved on from Flacco by trading him to the Denver Broncos in the ensuing offseason. But that does not excuse Baltimore from wrongfully keeping Flacco through 5 seasons of mediocrity. New York Giants, Eli Manning. Remember what we said about teams having a tough time moving on from a quarterback who won them a Super Bowl? Well, Eli won the Giants too, so it's no wonder they kept him around for so long. What we don't understand, however, is their decision to draft running back Saquon Barkley 2nd overall in 2018 when Sam Darnold, Josh Rosen, and future superstars Josh Allen and Lamar Jackson were still on the board. Nope, the Giants decided to stick with Eli for another year, and they paid for that decision. New York finally drafted Eli's successor in 2019, reaching for Daniel Jones with the number 6 pick, even though Jones wasn't really considered a first-round talent. The Giants kept lying to themselves, believing that Eli, a solid but never elite QB, would make up for all these roster flaws around him. If only they had traded Eli after that treacherous 2017 season when they went 3-13. Maybe, just maybe, they could have ended up with Josh Allen in the 2018 draft. And maybe Eli gets to flourish with a contender for 1 or 2 more seasons. Oh well, what could have been. But which other NFL teams made a mistake by holding on to a quarterback for way too long? Join us in the comment section below. If you like this video and learned a thing or two, clicking the like button helps out a ton. And hey, we appreciate it. If this is your first time coming around to TPS though, subscribing is a great idea because we put out videos like this every single day. But as always, thanks for watching and we'll see you guys next time.